Mark Dubin is a graduate and faculty member of the University of Maryland's flagship campus at College Park. Mark Dubin holds a position as a senior faculty specialist for the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources and serves as a senior technical advisor for Region 3 of the US EPA. In addition, Mr. Dubin is a historic weapons safety officer for the Maryland Park Service, specializing in interpretation of military flintlock-era weapons and associated material culture, collaborating with federal, state, and municipal agencies, as well as private NGOs across Eastern North America. Mr. Dubin manages public education programs on American history from 1775 to 1815, with emphasis on Maryland. Mr. Dubin has formerly held multiple positions with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, and private industry. So without further ado, let's give Mr. Mark Dubin a round of applause to start off this program, and we will begin today. Is Your Excellency. Thank you.
Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming this morning. Make sure this will work for me. But anyway, I want to talk a little bit about something that I've been in the process of doing some research on. It's still ongoing, so there's still many things we don't know yet. We're still discovering as we go. But we do provide some interpretation of this particular regiment each year at the Articles of Confederation Day here at the center. So if you have a chance to come out this coming year, come out and see us about that, talk some more on that. But today we're inside, nice warm spot, and be able to sit down and relax. So, but as far as the title of this, part of this is going back and looking at original documentation. So I had an opportunity to go online to the Founders Online Archives and find letters from Colonel Thomas Hartley to George Washington, and back and forth on that. And it's really that type of documentation that really gives us personal insight on what they're seeing, what they're feeling, what's going on here, which is very important for developing interpretive programs, teaching the public about history, I think. So every letter he writes starts off with, "May it please Your Excellency." So that's really how they're referring to General Washington at the time, really reverence in his office. So that's sort of the theme behind this. So as far as what we're going to talk about here this morning, we're going to do a little introduction. Very briefly, we're going to talk about the additional Continental Regiments of 1777 to 1778. We're raising of Hartley's Continental Regiment, looking at the military service that regiment provided, and more specifically on their time here in York, the York encampment, during the winter of 1777 to 1778. We're wrapping that up with what happened to them and what became of them. So for myself, as mentioned on that, sort of the background in history and research with the Maryland Park Service, and also administer a volunteer interpretive program named Chesapeake Independent Blues, and we work with various programs across multiple sites here in the region, as far away as Canada, Ohio, and Louisiana. So we do get out a little further, stretch our legs a little bit for these type of programs as well. So I administer these programs and provide oversight for them. So looking at the additional Continental Regiments, what were they? Why did they come about? How were they different from other Continental Regiments? Very important to understand, the background of this type of structure and so forth. So these are some images there of various units that were part of this structure, and really became about because General Washington felt that Congress wasn't preparing to raise enough men to fight the war. So this is late 1776. Congress is developing a plan for how the war is going to be carried on the following year. And essentially what they're looking at is Congress is recommending 88 regiments in this plan. But Washington basically writes and says he'd rather see a minimum of 110. He feels that it's as far as the need is there to raise additional regiments. So Congress basically listens to him and comes to a decision on 27th of December 1776, authorized his request. But there's a catch. There's always a catch. So he's authorized to raise 16 battalions or regiments of infantry on that, and that he's given complete power, full and ample power to basically do this. So it sounds like a good plan, right? Good idea. They set this up so that these regiments are going to be raised directly under Washington's authority. And what the norm of the time was that the states, individual states, would raise those regiments, not in the individual. So who's General Washington working for? Congress, right? Does Congress have money? They have a ability to support that? Not really. It's the states who have the authority and power. They're the taxation. They're the ones who have the abilities, to support those. And so this really dropped into Washington's lap, so to speak. But he has to figure out how to do this. So as far as how you get from 16 to the 110, Congress did also approve 6 other additional extra regiments, like the German regiment, Canadian regiment, and so forth. And they were also not tied to individual states, just like the additions. So who were these 16 battalions that were authorized and formed? So there's pretty long list here, but you can see highlighted here. Hartley's is part of this. So these additional Continental regiments weren't numbered, which was typical times. It would be the first this, the second that, and so forth in the state. So these were separate from states, so they weren't numbered, and they went by whoever the commanding officer, the colonel, who was raising the regiment. So it was their ordained additional Continental regiment. So that's why we see Thomas Hartley. It's one of those ones who's recommended to fill that ruling. And then we have some additional Continental regiments as well, but some of these, 2 of these corrals and scrambles were never formed. So just so a much more abbreviated list, even the 16 that was originally planned. And these other additional regiments are going to come into play later on here in the fate of Hartley's as well. So in January 1779, excuse me, in 1778, excuse me, typo there, but as far as 78, we're starting to see these regiments being formed. They're basically being recruited for there on that. Hartley's on there basically gets formed. But as we get into 2 years down the road, and what happens to these is that by 1779, the idea is that they're really not working. They don't have the state support, and so they really can't sustain themselves. So by 79, the decision is to abolish the structure, combine these. And you can see Hartley's is combined with Patton's and Malcolm's additional regiments to form the 11th PA, Pennsylvania Regiment. And they would go on to serve out in the Western frontier with the Sullivan Clinton expedition against the Loyalists and Native Americans out there to pacify the West. But you look at the sort of the viewpoint of Hartley talking about this sort of what's happening is change. Kind of says it very succinctly. He said, is that basically at present they are lost, unacknowledged by any state. A very small share of fame will accrue to them. So he's finding out, he's seen the light already in 1778 that the future of these additional Continental regiments is limited, and they're probably not going to survive. He actually ends up taking a position in the Pennsylvania Assembly, so he gets out of the military entirely on that. But so there's this question about what's going to happen to these regiments. So we're going to sort of step back and say, well, what's going on with Hartley and how he's raising this regiment on there, across the structure. And one of the unique things about Hartley's is that because he's not tied to Vicar State, he's actually able to raise troops across all the states. So he's raising troops in Pennsylvania, he's raising troops in Maryland, he's raising troops in Delaware, he's raising troops in Virginia. So he talks about he's writing constantly. He's going from state to state, recruiting officers, got officers out in the field looking for folks to recruit on. So from the time when we see the approval by Congress in January that these regiments are basically authorized by Washington, they're forming companies. And so the idea here is that Hartley would like to form 10 companies. That's a large regiment. Normally be more 8 on that. But he thinks he can do it. So he's requesting the ability to raise 10 companies from across these states. But the reality is he only ever forms 8. He just doesn't have the ability to fill those companies out. And what he comes up with is 4 companies from Pennsylvania, 3 from Maryland, and 1 from Virginia. And so this is a part that's, some folks, it's a little bit less than about that Virginia company, but it did exist. We found great documentation about it in our research. So it definitely was there and did happen. And then after he forms up his regiment, he basically gets assigned to General Anthony Wayne to the 1st Pennsylvania Brigade on May 22nd and hits New Jersey. So what I've done here is takes excerpts from his letters. He's describing about what he's doing, what's going on. And so, he's looking at finding officers to develop these companies, to recruit them on that. And it's not easy because, there's questions about this new structure, I'm sure, at the time. So officers that are experienced are like, do I want to invest in this? Do I want to put my stake, my reputation into this? And so he gets turned down by a lot of potential officers in the process. They get better offers somewhere. It's very, very competitive all there. So a little bit like the job market today, right? So a lot more jobs, not enough people will fill. But he's seeing some success, and he's hopeful that he's going to be successful in recruiting his regiment. And again, I guess he's working in multiple states, so he's got to cover a really large area to recruit in, which can be good at that. And he's encouraging these officers to raise their companies forward. He did that. Again, he's hopeful to raise a 10, but the reality is he never gets them. So. And what's unusual here, he's talking about potentially using these 2 companies for light infantry and a grenadier company. Grenadier companies are really not normal for Continental Line regiments. On that, it's more in keeping with the British establishment, military establishment. Not that there weren't grenadier companies in the Americas, but they're not typical for Continental Line. So we don't think that ever happens. But we're still looking at it. So you can see he's writing from Yorktown. He's writing from here. He's Lancaster, he's in York on that. And he's keeping in contact with Washington because that's his approval authority. So he's asking Washington's blessing essentially for what he's doing, keeping him informed. So, but it's really interesting, these letters. So you're just getting a little small excerpt from these, but he's talking about how many years experience he has, and he's maybe the more senior officer of the other 16 regiment, battalions. And should they be called the first? Should be Washington's guards? He's talking about all these little things. And I can just imagine Washington's got the weight of the world on his shoulders. And he's like, really? He thinks this is the only thing I got to worry about. And so, but his responses are really short. On the letters back to Hartley, versus Hartley's are extensive. So anyway, it's kind of interesting to sort of read between the lines here. But anyway, he's doing that, but he's also got to secure the clothing, the uniforms, the arms, the accoutrements for these men as well. So he's working on that at the same time. So he's hoping to get those here locally. Like I see, he's contracted with York and Lancaster for arms. for the regiment, and the misspellings there are from the actual writing online, so I can't take credit for those, but anyway, so that's an ordeal in itself, because guess what? Everybody else is trying to do the same thing at the same time, right? There's only so many resources to go around. So he has a very long process to get that done. And he's looking for clothing. So what he's proposing to do is to have a blue uniform faced with white, based on the cut of his Excellency's uniform. So he wants to mirror wash, because he wants his regiment to be Washington's guards, be the top of the echelon. So he's doing that, but we're still questioning about if that's really happened or not yet. We'll talk about that more later. But so he's again trying to hunt down all these materials and get his men uniformly equipped. You can see he's making trips to Virginia. He's working on that Virginia company. And the part of Virginia where the recruiting station is we've identified as Shepherdtown. Shepherdtown, West Virginia is where this recruiting station is for this company. So that was sort of a neat find in the process here. And again, he keeps talking about trying to find these arms and clothing and all that on here. So, and again about the blue and white cloth. So here, of course, he's back in Lancaster now. So I'm sure he's trying to work out these arrangements with the contractors for the uniform equipment. But he's hoping to get his first company to Philadelphia. So the idea was he's recruiting across the region, but he's trying to get these companies fitted out, recruited, and send them to Philadelphia, where they're going to be combined into the regiment at that point. So really, that's the direction that he's trying to aim to pull all these in and get them there. So and of course, that's a process unto itself. So there he's going to basically, they're going to meet up with other elements, other additional continental regiments there, and part of the army. So here's one of the things he's talking about was several matters such as marking buttons and caps. So he's asking, it's like, well, what number should we use? And of course, Washington doesn't provide any. So these are just they're never numbered, never numbered regiments. Those are just for the United States on it. And then, so that sort of fits into, as we go along, you're trying to figure out what these men look like. What was the uniform they're wearing during their service? Back in Yorktown here, April 27th, he keeps working on trying to get his battalion up to speed, and he's looking at these 4 companies between 150 and 200 men. Marched last week towards Philadelphia, so he's finally getting some of this regiment to Philadelphia, and get them get that process finalized, because Washington wants these regiments. He's waiting for them. The Army's waiting for them to arrive. And of course, back in Yorktown, he's continuing to basically admonish his officers, get the recruiting done, get the men enlisted, get them to Philadelphia as soon as possible. So by April 27th, he gives an account of where he is in the recruiting process. So these are the companies, the companies within his regiment that he's formed, and you can see that the largest one is 80 men for rank and file, the smallest being 30. So normally you want to see, that 80, or a little higher there for fully staffed company on that. So some of these companies, most of them are half strength on that. So it's interesting to see between the 27th of April and when they finally gather in Philadelphia, how many more men he really got. I'm thinking everyone's having trouble recruiting sufficient numbers across all these regiments, and it's probably never got to a fully manned regiment. So that background about where this regiment's at, the trials, tribulations are going through, trying to get raised in a very short period of time. and get to Philadelphia, I'm going to talk about the next stage of this regiment service. And so, he basically reports back to, to the Common Army, with, Anthony Wayne's, Anthony Wayne's first Pennsylvania Brigade. So that's where this regiment is assigned to, the May 22nd. And essentially the first part, the first few months of 1777, they're basically part of the Forest Wars campaign. So the British, they were coming out from New York, and they're trying to, destroy and pick up supplies and so forth. So they're basically trying to form an umbrella protection on that there. So it's really not till September that we get into the thick of the fight. Hartley goes into the first major battle, the Battle of Brandywine, September 11th. Again, they're still part of the First Pennsylvania Brigade under Anthony Wayne, but he's been, elevated to division commander because Benjamin Lincoln who was the division commander, is no longer there. So Wayne has stepped up to be acting in that position. So now he has a division versus just a brigade underneath his control. Then we see later on in September the Battle of Paoli. It's kind of famous with General Anthony Wayne, his history. And later on in October, Battle of Germantown, October 4th, still part of the same force. And then by the end of the year, they're finally headed in Valley Forge for the winter encampment. At that point, he's part of Milton's division, reassigned to that at that point. So here's really looking at a lot going on within 1 year, right? They just were raised. These poor guys get into the maelstrom of combat here, very short. So we look at these battles and what's going on with Hartley's and Wayne's division on here. They're really in the middle of it. I mean, they're not in the reserve. They're not, some flank somewhere or whatnot. They are in the thick of it. So really a testament to the courage and bravery of these men and the ability of the officers. So you look at the Battle of Brandywine, they're basically in the thick of it for almost the entire day. Once the British forge the creek there in Chad's Ford, and they take the forward artillery position on the Great Road, that division is basically under siege at that point from a combined British and German attack. It's coming up to their flows. So this Anglo-Hessian division that basically engages with them, overruns their artillery position and basically runs into Wayne's division that's behind, several hundred yards behind this artillery position, and engages with them. So just to give you an idea of how thick this fight is that Hartley, of course, he's acting as brigade commander. So Major Lewis Bush is commanding the regiment at that point. His horse is shot out from on that. He gets another horse and is mounting on that, and he himself is cut down. He's shot through, fatally wounded, and it represents the highest ranking American officer that's killed that. So that gives you an idea. So where do you think he's riding his horse? Is he in the front of the line? He's behind one, right? He's riding up and down probably. So that gives you a sort of sense when the highest ranking officer that's killed that day is from that regiment of what they're involved with. So they hold their own, but basically they're going to be flanked on both ends from the Anglo-Hessian division. And Wade decides to pull them back 600 yards to another hill behind them, taking a new position on that, which they do. And it's done early. It's not like a rout. And in the process, they also bring off that artillery that was being overrun as well. So they bring artillery with them, which tells you that moving artillery pieces on the field takes some doing, right? It takes some commitment to do that because it's not easy, it's slow. And if you want to get out of there, that's the last thing you're going to worry about is dragging a big piece of iron or brass behind one of the carriers. So any way to do that. So again, that's an indication that they can early retreat back to this position. And that engagement continues until night. So that, the rest of that day, they're heavily engaged with the British division. So we can only imagine the price that was paid in that one engagement, their first major engagement. It gives you an idea of the battle map here, and there in the bottom is the movement. Here's Wayne here. You see his retreat back to his secondary position, and the porting of his green here against them with the Anglo-Hessian division. So, of course, this is part of the much larger engagements occurring during the battle. So, a very important one. So moving on to Battle Pioli. So just a couple weeks later, all that. So again, Hartley's regiments there, part of the First Pennsylvania Brigade. They're in the Wayne at the encampment, and this battle is very chaotic. It's nighttime. You hear about folks that depending upon where you are on the battlefield, you have a very different viewpoint of what's going on. Right? And so looking at this, I'm getting very different viewpoints about what's happening. Some is just like utter chaos, men being banded in their tents, and then others are actually formed on the road in column and doing a rear action. So what I see here with the First Pennsylvania Brigade is that they're formed. They know what's going on. They form. They're on the road. They're basically forming a rear guard action to protect the rest of the army at the time. But they get stalled, and apparently there's an artillery piece breaks down on the road and blocks the road. Try to get it off, and so they basically get run over by a British banner. Literally, Hartley's is second back from the rear. In the rear guard action, and so the 7th Pennsylvania regiments behind them, they get mauled, and then it just blew right into Hartley's behind them. So being in a column formation means that you're in the process of traveling. And it's very difficult to form a defense. I mean, it's part of your job as a rear guard action, but you're limited on what you can do versus an open field. So you can imagine the chaos that's probably going on in this situation. So the brigade is very quickly infiltrated by the British, and we see the casualties resulting from that. So we look at about 272 casualties compared to 11. So pretty one-sided on this. So that's his rise to term massacre about this engagement, but that's really more about propaganda, American propaganda. We're going to look at what the men thought in Hartley's and how they talked about this later on. So again, sort of chaotic. I can't even find a good battlefield map. So we have talked to American Battlefield Trust actually. Great one for Pioli, but I could not find one all there. So the Battle of Germantown, happens the following month there. A very different type of engagement that's occurring here, so it's really composed. But Washington laid out a complex plan that sort of fell apart on there, but it was a good start to it. So again, we have Hartley's part of the First Pennsylvania Brigade. They're going out with Wayne's division, and they're basically are the ones who collided with the British Second Light Infantry Regiment. That's the forward outpost guard. So they're the first one to basically encounter the British in this engagement on the road into Germantown. So they basically get stalled out in this engagement. It's pretty hot firefight. Their other General John Sullivan, he immediately brings up the 1st and 2nd Maryland brigades and puts them to the right of Wayne's. And so they're on surrounding the road, moving into Germantown, and basically pushing their way in through the British lines. So I think one of the things here I saw in the correspondence here was the shouts of Hartley's men during this melee and charge. Have out the bloodhounds with revenge, wings, and fair. So I think that's interesting because these were the men who were at field, the men who lost their friends. They're not calling it a massacre, right? They're calling it a fair. So so I think they saw a little different than others might. One of the things here is that they did not offer any quarter to the British. So British are surrendering, and they're not accepting surrenders at this point. So it really is revenge, for what happened. So weeks before. So this push between the Maryland brigades and the Pennsylvania brigades is very successful. Moves on through, rolls up the British lights on there. They move past several hundred yards past the Chew House, which is very famous in his book. They basically some of the light infantry sought shelter in the house, but these brigades just went past them. And they get all the way in, and they capture the British camp at this point. But part of the issue we have that you might have heard about is about a thick fog. It's very difficult to see, and fog, of course, you have echoing of gunshots and artillery shots in there, so it becomes very chaotic. Try to understand what's going on. So they're basically moving forward, but they hear all these gunshots and artillery in their rear. And of course, you think, well, who is that, right? We just get through here. Who's firing to the rear? Are they being? There's another element of the British Army's come around. The flank gun is coming in, so they decide to basically retreat. Let's see what's going on here. But the problem is that the Regiment division is moving up on the road behind them. They don't know who it is. They think it's British, and so they have a friendly fire. They're firing at one another through the fog. They're taking casualties, and that really just becomes too much. And this, the brigade breaks and runs, and they don't stop until they're 3 miles down the road at that point. So they're completely out of it at this point. And of course, everything stalls out. The Chew House, about that. So that's sort of the breakdown of what happens, why the Americans, lose victory, in the hand there, but because of these things. So again, interesting to see, Hartley's regiment involved with this, what their actions are. A little better battlefield map of the Battle of Germantown. And you can see, Wayne's is right here in the thick of it, right? So again, they're not being held reserve. They're not on the flank for sure. So what does this mean? Remember we started off with a regiment that maybe was under strength to begin with. They've gone through 3 major engagements and have been in the middle of it. So our estimates is that they probably had about roughly 50% casualty rate in the regiment. So they're already probably under strength. Now they've lost at least half of the net. So they're basically used up, right? At this point, at the end of the campaign. So we're going to talk a little bit about what happens next, and about how that relates here to York. So, Hartley goes into Valley Forge for the winter camp along with the rest of the army there in December. I could imagine kind of limping in at this point, ragged, torn apart, equipment and clothing shredded and dirty and so forth from what they've been through. And they get reassigned to the Naval Department on January 9th that following year. And then Washington assigns them to York. And there's a couple ideas of why that happens, why it picks Hartley's to do that. One, of course, Hartley's from here, so he knows everybody. a number of his men are recruited. So this is their neck of the woods. And he needs somebody to go there and basically pacify Congress, right? Congress is like, we need a guard, we need somebody to protect us, you know. The British should come here and capture us. So the Washington's like, you can imagine, okay, you know, I'll go send somebody over there, just take care of it. So he sends them here. So my thought is that this was sort of a respite for us. You know, he knew what they've been through. He knew they were from here. That if any regiment was going to come back, that they were probably the best suited on there to get along with the local inhabitants. So, on that. So some of the thoughts that we don't really know, but that's probably what I think is going on in the background. So the other thing I think is about the men and hearts. So here they trudged to Valley Forge, right? They're set about building fortifications and huts and so forth. They're working on that, and suddenly they're told, "Oh, by the way, take your plans, guys. We're going to York." So you can imagine you've been digging in the mud, you've been, you know, chopping trees, you've been doing all this work to build something for yourself, and then you're told to leave it and go, you know, to go. So I can imagine there was probably a little bit of like, "Oh, come on," at this point. But you know, going to York, you know, did give them the opportunity to have better quarters, right? At least they'd be in York, they have access to food better than with the Valley Forge. So there was an upside to it. But I'm guessing, you know, as any enlisted men would do, is like really change your mind after I've already done this work. So probably some other people, some other souls are got the advantage of the work that they did. So they get here, they have to find quarters. We don't really know much about what that's like. There's no military barracks here, so they're probably having to find places where they can get to, barns, sheds. You know, officers are going to get rooms and houses and things that fit their station line. But they're probably spread out all over the town. So, and what's their daily duty? Well, they've got to have a guard. So they got to have a guard for Congress, and every day they've got to have about 20 or 30 men for this guard for Congress to, you know, take care of their needs and so forth. Hartley writes about this, and it's like is ruling mundane duty. So they're doing the guard for something that never happens. They're cutting firewood because Congress wants to stay warm in the courthouse, so they order the army to go cut wood for the firewood. Well, there's nothing here in town, so they got to travel way out of town, you know, every day and drag this firewood back and splits in wintertime and everything else. And they also have to keep the cells warm too. So, but they're doing everything. They're doing it, coming out for emergencies and fire or something there, the fire department, I guess. So it's really interesting as far as, you know, what they're doing. And they're also trying to recruit. They're trying to re-equip themselves, you know, get their uniforms repaired, things like that. So they're here basically until June. And then finally they get relieved by Pennsylvania militia, and they finally get the head out. But, so they're here about half a year doing this. So some of the excerpts from Hartley's letters again, describing what's going on here. They're having to court martials. They're having to act like the justice of the peace. They're having to go arrest people. You know, they're doing things. And I think it's sort of interesting about this example in particular. This is talking about South Mountain between the states of Maryland and Pennsylvania. And you all know where South Mountain is. I mean, they're picking up and trying people from down there. So that's a pretty far reach, you know, from New York, by foot essentially. So it's kind of interesting about that. There's a whole story behind this about these men. They pick up all sorts of stories. Well, I it's the horse, but it was because my brother gave it to me. And I mean, all the stuff they go into. It's just quite interesting. See, that's where part of it. But he's asked the watch to tell him what to do with the findings of the court, because they want to hang one guy. Definitely. So anyway, talk a little bit more about here, about these men and what they're accused of and so forth. They don't sound like the best folks in the world, so probably a little on the shady side about this. So, but Washington eventually part of this shocking king. So they get on. I can imagine the court is like, really, you know, we went through this and they're just going to let them off. And he talks again about the duty here. And he's talking, this is in May, so he's going back to Washington saying, well, yes, the men got quarters here, so it was better than going for it. But they just sit on their grants all the time. They were working basically like dogs here to cut wood, haul water, take care of everything and so forth. And like so they had a lot of disadvantages as well. So it's sort of like if you're located on a western outpost versus you're sitting right next to Congress, everybody's going to be watching everything you do, and they're going to be fighting about everything. He's also looking to try to get resources. So he's asking for the state of Pennsylvania to grant a bounty so he can recruit more individuals to replace those who enlisted with the regiment. So he actually gets money back from the Commonwealth to do that, which is quite the feat. And of course, again, repairing uniforms and getting replacement folks. So one of the things that comes across this is that a great source are deserve descriptions that they're posting in the local papers. So we get an opportunity to get an insight of what Hartley's band may look like in June, July of 1778, when they're on their way from York to Philadelphia. After Hartley's gets relieved by Pennsylvania militia. And so if we look at the August 6, 1778 edition of Pennsylvania Packet, there's this great description. And so it's you can't make up those things, but basically it's these soldiers of Hartley's. They're identified, they know who they are, they know their names. They break into this man's house who's a paymaster for the Pennsylvania militia and steal the treasure. Mm-hmm. And they're on the lam. They're nowhere to be found. One of them gets caught by the regiment, but escapes. So he's out too. But he said, "Oh, yeah, we did it. Here's what everybody so and so did." And he has descriptions, of course, and everything of them in the advertisement. But what's interesting, it provides us also that really rare informed eyewitness account of what these soldiers were wearing when they did the deed. They're all dressed in blue uniform coats, faced with yellow, not white, and grenadier or light infantry caps. So the illustration we have here is Don Triani rendition of what he thought that a sergeant in the regiment I looked at in early 1777 when they were still nice and clean and fresh. But we do see rare examples of these leather binder caps, and so he thinks that might be what this description is referring to. And on the left here is the original that still survives. This is from Rhode Island. This Grenadier Regiment was raised there, but went out of existence when the British arrived. So this dates to like 1774, 75, and then this regiment ceased to exist because of the British occupations. But anyway, so interesting to see, so they're wearing the yellow facings or white facings. And so yellow could be anonymous to Buff, which was Washington's uniform. So he's trying to emulate Washington, who knows. It could also really be really soiled white, right? It's gone through a whole campaign, dirty, it's dingy, it's yellow, from all that. So we don't know. So, but sort of in summary, what happens to these, this regiment after they leave York and head to Philadelphia. So they get reassigned to Sunbury, Pennsylvania. I think this sort of speaks to how many men they really have still active. They get assigned to Sunbury, they're to guard the western frontier from the town. All that. So they're out there in the summer and fall of 1778. And then in January, they get reorganized. And so they combine with two of the other additional regiments to form the Pennsylvania Regiment, 11th Pennsylvania, all that. And then they go to the Sullivan Clinton expedition out west. And that's the last we kind of hear about them. So it's really about this, this trial of an idea about a national army versus a state state supported army, and it didn't really work out well, at least this point in time, because of that ability to supply and sustain. So very interesting, sort of comment about political structure and the politics and this as well, what's going on with the campaigns and the military. So this is a friend of mine, is one of my volunteers. This is a picture from this past Art Federation Day here in York, and he's actually wearing clothing based on the deserter description from Hartley. So they what the recruit band looked like before they were issued the uniform. But this is where you can find me. I also administer a nonprofit organization, Friends of America's War for Independence, and there's a Facebook page there as well, so you can find about what's going on here and some of our sister units out in Ohio that way as well. But anyway, I don't know what the timeline is, but
we've got time for questions.
Be happy to answer any questions. So, thank you. Yes,
was there any reason to have, since they were here in New York, was there any reason to have a militia as well?
Well, I guess there was an interest in doing it. The Guard Congress, the Washington had to provide, a Continental Regiment to do it. So I guess it probably tells you that, the locals were like, no thanks. And you can, in looking at some of the correspondence I look at from like, Adams, writing back to his wife and so forth. The New Englanders, like, probably others, but they're like, York is like, sort of not a great place to be. They don't like the people, they don't like the place, it's dirty. These foreigners are out here with these strange customs. We don't know what they're doing. They're having these strange holidays, and it's like it's completely foreign to us. It's not English.
It's more like French.
Yeah. So it's really this clash of groups that's happening. So the Puritans didn't mix well with the Germans, essentially, but yeah, so I can't see there's a lot of interest from the locals to mount a guard to protect these people. So they didn't ask for them to be here, kind of thing. Right? So yeah, I can see where this falls back on Washington. I would say, hey, we need this. So, but June, nice weather, crowd's got planned, right? Okay, yeah, we'll sign up for doing militia duty, and we'll get paid for it, and we'll do that. But the winter time, thanks. so yeah, so it's kind of interesting how that works out. But coming from an agricultural background and looking at the seasons and the workload of things, it makes sense. The timing of that. So, a good question. Yes.
What started your interest in colonial history and the military side of it?
Really always been interested in, even as a youngster. And I went with to a Tea Party reenactment when I was very young, and I got enamored with it. It's like, this is for me, right? So my mother said she never saw me so interested in anything in my life before. But so I signed up. I was young, and that was back in the bicentennial 1776. So continued onward. Did a lot of different things over time. Went to Europe and England for programs across the United States, and had an opportunity to really work with some of the great historians and publishers of the time, and so learned from them, and then eventually made my way into the worked for the National Park Service, and worked for the Maryland Park Service on that. They were like, hey, we need to become a safety officer. So I said, okay. So I ended up actually helping them write the standards that we use today. And now I am like the senior person. Everyone who's the trainers are all folks that I train. That I've seen when they respond very well. So they come to me to ask me the questions, archival questions. Why is this, or what we do here? But it's good, it really is, and, I like to see good interpretive programs happen, and, my job is to make sure the public's educated and everybody goes home with all their good. So thank you. Yes, sir.
Question about Hartley. With this correspondence to Washington. I think a little more about history. I think an educated man, very,
Yes,
and an educated man who could write was even more so because you can have a natural, it's like, hey, this guy's pretty good, But and then to have such knowledge of military affairs, meaning had he received British training? I mean, what I'm saying, as a young man that prior to the revolution, was he educated in the military arts?
well, if you were going to be an officer at the time, you had to be able to read and write. And so that meant you probably in a higher social class to be able to
At
have.
least he had to know someone who
Yes,
he
yes.
could correspond that way with.
Yes, he's corresponding with Washington, very fluent, and very verbose. But this wasn't an isolation. He didn't just drop in from outer space and become colonel of this new regiment. He was recommended for the position by Henry Lee. So he had people who admired his service. He had served in previously the Pennsylvania militia. He was an officer there. The very beginnings of the war. He'd seen service in 1776. With the Continental service and the like. So he had had the opportunity now to learn and read, but he also had personal first-hand experience as well.
So he didn't have history back in the French and Indian. He was too young for that.
I haven't seen at this point that he did have a service into that period. Everything I've seen so far has been with those periods at this point.
And one more thing, you mentioned about South Mountain. At this time, the boundaries of this area was wilderness. There was no Adams County or such. All of York become
York was extensively.
Yeah, I mean,
Went through the Ohio, right? It is, and
so
you can imagine York. You can imagine South Mountains were the roads, right? That was uncivilized. It was the mountain region. Yeah, and so you can, it's probably a good haven for the folks that don't want to be in the back east here in the population areas. Live by their own measures. It makes sense on that we see that going on here. But like I said, there's a whole story about you go in these court proceedings about what these banners are saying what happened, what really happened, and it's like it reminds me of watching like a TV court scene, right? This person caught red-handed. Oh well, this is really what happened. This is why my wife got thrown out. I had to go back and serve because my wife and kids were destitute, and I needed to get a place for them to go. And then I needed to borrow a horse, and so I could get there faster. Well, I put the horse in a pasture or somebody else's property. I didn't keep it, So it just, it's interesting to go through these things, and they get let off at the end. So, but the one some of the correspondence is one person. He is like, just hang. I mean, he's like, there's no recourse to the person. He's like bad through and through. But then he has a change of heart at the very end and pleads for pardon. But so anyway, just that's just a microcosm of things that are going on here. And but it tells you, that if they're doing that from here, it's Hartley's regiment and his court martial is taking care of it here. There's nobody else west of here, right? There can't be anybody else out there, because he's the one dealing with it. So it really tells you about what you're going to see as you go west on there, at least for the military stuff. Speaks volumes, right? Yes, sir.
You mentioned the grenadiers. Can you, and that they weren't very common. Can you give us a comparison between like the grenadiers and the rest and how they were different, how they were the same?
Well, the original form of the grenadiers goes back in the early 18th century, and they were the guys who had the grenades. So that was their job. So they had these bags full of big iron balls, grenades filled with gunpowder, and they would light them with a slow match and then toss them over, fortification or earthworks. So that was their job. And so they needed, because you're carrying around a big heavy bag of, iron balls with gunpowder and a lit match at the same time. They looked for folks who were big, big stature, could handle the job. And they wanted somebody who lobbed these heavy shells over the fortification. So they wanted tall guns, big, structure. If you were like 5 foot, you weren't going to think. So that's what they were historically. And what happened over time in the 18th century, they warped. And so they really weren't using them for toss of grenades, but they became elite company within the regiments. So they wore these, they could wear these distinctive miter caps. And so what's the reason why you wear a miter cap versus a cocked hat? Well, if you look at George here, if he's lobbying a grenade, he's going to knock his hat off, right? So a miter cap is straight up and down, so it allows you to lob a grenade easier without knocking it out. That's why they developed. But so they kept their miter caps typically. They might even have the brass, slow match, box on your belt. They were kind of like, they would have a sidearm, a sword typically. So they kept those elements of what they were and carried forward, but they're still at this point they're being armed. Muskets are in line with the infantry and the like, so they're really not being used for that purpose. So the Americans are emulating, especially in the early part of the war, the British, because that's who they know, that's who they see, right? And so, you're raising a regiment. Wouldn't it be neat to have a grenadier? So we can emulate the British and show them, hey, we're just as good as you. So, but that's a lofty goal. And if you're just trying to build the rank and file, that's probably not your first priority to create grenadier. You're welcome. But good question. But that's like, so one of the things that sort of comes up is that Hartley have this, and they have a description about these guys wearing grenadier light grenades from the reserve troops. But the thought is that I actually have the correspondence where he actually approached an officer to lead this from Maryland, but the guy turned him down, went for a better officer. So he didn't get the officer that he wanted. So he actually. The other thing he's talking about in his letters is that, he's out here competing against everybody else trying to recruit too. And he's talking sort of bemoaning. It's like, well, I listed these guys, but I was the nice guy. I turned over to this other regiment guy. So it's really tough. The other thing he's running into is that he talks about that the veterans came from, from Fort Washington and the New York campaign stuff. They're coming home. Well, they're like, tattered up, beat up. A lot of them are imprisoned, some British hulks up there, and Staten Island stuff. And he's like, so they're coming home, and everybody's like, oh, these guys don't look right. This war must really be hell, right? And it's like, I don't know if I would really want to be recruited. So he said he's really getting sort of anti, recruiting, sentiments coming because these folks are seeing that, the ones that did make it home and come back, they're not in great shape. So the war wasn't kind. So Hartley's got, yes, he's verbose. Yes, he thinks really highly of himself. Yes, I'm sure he's like, watches like, just don't do it and leave me alone. But, he does do a great job for what he's going to do and creates a regiment out of nothing. Across all the states, so and they serve well. So in the end, I think he did a good job. But he does see the end coming. It gets out. He abandons the regiment to take the seat in his limo. He talks to Washington. Well, I'm sorry, I was going to talk to you personally about it. I've already sent my resignations for the Congress. I'm sure watching all that. He's bypassing with the Congress and resign. And he's, well, if I keep serving in the military for another year, I'll be destitute. I gotta go like, I'm gonna serve in legislature. But some things maybe don't change. But good question. Any additional questions? Like I said, we're still in the process of research and finding